In today's episode, we will be looking at the LEGO Harry Potter Kit 75956, the Quidditch match. I'm going to take you through how I built the diorama, as well as show you the speed build for the kit as well. The kit had some particularly clever features that really encourages creative play, so let's get to it. In the last video, I talked about using modeller's foam, which most builders do and I intend to do in the future. It did occur to me though that when I was younger and had limited resources, if I had to choose between buying a Lego kit or some foam, obviously I was going to buy the Lego kit. I did remember though that we were forever throwing out old boxes used for shopping and deliveries, and we still do that now, so I've decided to show how I made a big diorama using a cardboard base because it's readily available and it lets me spend the money on the Lego kit. I spent time on making the base thicker to support the larger area and the weight of the sculpted. After cutting various pieces of cardboard into squares, I glued them together to make the baseboard. I then used some masking tape to put on the edges to hide the inside of the cardboard. The next step is to prepare the sculpted to create the landscape. Sculpted is great, easy to use and is suitable for all ages and abilities. I ordered my box online from Officeworks in Australia, as all locations don't stock it. I do expect it to last a long time, and there are many other similar products which I'm sure you can find and would be just as good. I started by applying the sculpted to the mountain in the background, as you can see, and I use various tools to create curves for different mountain shapes. So for this diorama, I'm going to do the speed build early to allow me to map out the base plate, so let's go have a look. It's always a very exciting part when it comes time to build the model. The Lego kit I used in this diorama was the 75956 Quidditch match from the Harry Potter collection. A mid-sized kit that was fun to build and came with some really cool features. Things like the front panel and the Gryffindor Stadium swing so you can fly the little guy through. A bludger launcher and a flame that appears and disappears on the Slytherin Stadium. This kit was released in 2018, and as I mentioned before, it makes up one of the many Harry Potter kits. This kit has a great use of different colours that adds a lot to the scene and is really nice to look at. Using the long clear piece of Lego in front of the goals to make the figures float was a great idea that helped make this kit a lot of fun to play with. Overall, it's a great kit that I'm sure lots of people will enjoy. With the model built, I was able to make the templates for the different pieces, and I did this by placing the kit on the cardboard and tracing out the base. Using these templates, I then used the scissors to cut them out, ready to be used. For the main rock on the diorama, I used some old cardboard scraps to make the base for the hill and to help avoid wasting the sculpted, which would also add to the weight of the diorama. I then pinned the templates to the base plate. This is so that I could put the sculpted on, and it would keep the areas for the kit nice and clean, so it would sit nicely on the base plate. To make the sculpted mixture, I simply added as much as I thought I would need, and then started to add the water until it became a paste I could mould on the base plate. I also used any leftover sculpted to fill in the gaps at the edges of the cardboard, just to help strengthen it up. The sculpted for the flat area dried a bit quicker than I expected. I should have added a little bit more water, which meant it was not quite as smooth as I would have liked, but I used a scraper to help level it out, and in the end, with the static grass, it still looked really good. With the sculpted now dry, I was ready to start painting the rocks. To get the shade of grey I wanted, I mixed black and white acrylic paint. I did this a few times because I wanted different variations of grey to help make it look more realistic. The purpose of the first layer of dark grey is to cover all the areas I wanted as rocks, including every little spot and overhang. This is the base coat, so it needs a really good coverage so you don't have any of the sculpted showing through. When I started doing the large rock, I used a larger brush due to its size. I thought that this would make it easier to make sure I covered it properly, but I did still miss a few areas, so you do need to double check before you move on. And as you can see here, I did the same thing for the mountain range in the background. Put that nice thick layer of the dark grey to make sure that I'm covering up the sculpted. While the paint on the rocks was drying, I decided to paint the baseboard the earth colour. As you can see here, using a wide brush, I painted all the different sections. Again, much like the dark grey, making sure that I covered up all the white spots of the sculpted. If I did have any spillovers like you saw just then, I just used a tissue to wipe them up. I painted the land of the mountains in the background with the same brown to keep the consistency. For the mountain, I added the dirt and beige grout mixture to give the ground colour that greyness that you would see more regularly in a mountain, because that colour that you do put there does come through the static grass, because the static grass does not cover it 100%. Whereas on the flat area, I thought, well, that would be more likely to be a clayish colour, so I just left it as the brown. So it does mean I've got those two colours that are quite subtle. You can't quite see them, but they're definitely there. And I think it just adds a bit more realism and a bit more depth to colour to the model. After cleaning the mountain, you can see me spraying on the isopropyl alcohol and glue mixture just to really settle that dirt down to make sure it sticks. With this all done, I can now move back to the rocks. With the medium grey paint, this is where I started to add the highlights and make them look more lifelike. Using a dry, stiff brush held at a right angle, I only focused on the edges and I just made sure I had a very little bit of paint on the brush, so basically dry brushing, as this helps it go on at the right areas, because you just want those highlights. I then added a black wash, which helps make the shadows for the cracks and holes really darken up. I kept adding water to the black acrylic paint until it was like a dark tea, and then I added it to the areas that I wanted those shadows to be. I used a paper towel to mop up any extra bits, as I only wanted it in certain areas. Lastly, I put some white paint using a dry, stiff brush onto the very tips of the rock to just give that really weathered, wind-worn look. Looks awesome, it's really good. For the pitch, I wanted the grass and the colour to be really distinctive green. So for that particular area, I also put some bright green paint on it in preparation for the static grass. Remembering what I was talking about before, where that background colour can show through. So that's why I put the bright green there. Next comes the fun bit that turns a diorama from a worksite to an almost completed model. Static grass really lifts dioramas, and even with my cheap applicator, it makes a huge difference. It is easy with an applicator, and they are a lot cheaper now. Static grass applicators can be found online for around $30 Australian, and many of them come with static grass that you can use to practice with. I do think it's a good idea to do some practice runs, just so you get used to the way you shake it and get the grass to come out, and how far it needs to be from your model to make it stand up straight. To get started, I first spread the craft glue that's mixed with a little bit of water over the area that I want the grass. I add a little bit of water so that it doesn't dry quite as quickly, and it settles nicely on the model itself. For the pitch, I just used the bright green 2mm grass that actually came with the applicator, but it really makes it obvious that it is a pitch, so it looks really good. For this applicator, I've found that holding it between about 1 to 2 centimeters from the surface is about right, but as you're moving it across the static grass and shaking it, you'll see the grass standing up straight and actually moving as you take the applicator up and down. You'll see it shifting about. So just find the right distance that your applicator needs. Outside of the pitch and on the mountain itself, I used a mixture of the 6mm static grass and some of the 2mm static grass. Mixing those two together gave a nice transition because you can see some of the bright green grass in the background. Not a lot, but just enough to give that nice blend and texture. The next thing I did was put some coarse turf on, just to make it simulate some bushes and small shrubs, and then I used some isopropyl alcohol and the glue mixture to fix it all down. After doing the main landscape, I then taped up the mountain and then also sprinkled some coarse turf here, and I also added some of the dry leaf mix where I take leaves from outside and blend them up. It just brings a nice brown to the area. And again, this is all held on with the isopropyl alcohol being sprayed first, followed by the glue. The next step was to mark out the lines for the pitch. To do this, I used some cardboard templates that I then used some white paint and a small paintbrush to paint those lines. I think next time I would use some masking tape to mark out those lines. The issue was it was a funny curve, which made it a little bit more difficult. The next step was to add more of the little background trees that I made. These trees, all I did was make some triangles out of cardboard and then put some dark green coarse turf on them, all the same, and then just place them sporadically on the mountain. They're just to give that mountain a bit of depth, and when you see the picture, there are trees like that in the picture, so it just helps make it real there. As you can see, I literally just putting a little bit of glue on the static grass there, and then using the tweezers, I'll put the trees on. The next step is to glue the mountain and blend it in. To do this, I glued skewers inside the mountain part, so they made sure they held tight. I then aligned them onto the main board where I wanted the mountain to sit. That worked really well, and that bond was strengthened when I added some more glue at the rear of the mountain. Once that was all dry, I started to blend the mountain with the main board. I started with polyester fibre that I'd painted green and added some static grass to help it blend in. This made a great filler for the gap between the mountain and the main board itself. I used a skewer to make sure that the fibres were sitting firmly in that gap and blended in nicely. To help the coarse turf and dry leaf mix I was about to add to stick to the board, I used my eyedropper to get the glue mixture into the specific spots that I had chosen. Next, I added coarse turf, dry leaf mix and some static grass to stop the joint being such a defined angle. Just wanted to put that sort of more gentler curve in there. Again, I used a skewer to push the scenery to the spots that I wanted it to go to. You can't beat a good skewer. In this diorama, I only needed a few made trees to match the picture. I made the trees by using polyester fibre that I cut into the shape of triangles. I then dusted them with dark green coarse turf, then with a very light sprinkling of the same static grass I used on the ground. The next task was to add the trees. Using the precision drill, I used a small drill bit that was the same diameter as the tree trunks. That ensured a snug fit that meant I only needed a very small amount of glue. I just had to make sure that I orientated them to suit the model. As you can see here, they really do add something to the model. And there you have it, this diorama is all done. Another great idea from Lego, added to a diorama that looks really good. Now I just need to go find another kit to model. See you then.